And, ultimately, this is the thing about jobs. I don't have a dream job. I don't dream of labor. I don't think about what I want to do. And that's because I only dream of pizza. And sometimes the Real Housewives. And sometimes Taylor Swift. Hello everybody, my name is Farhad and thanks for clicking on my face. Today's video is going to be a chill little chit chat between us besties, mainly because I didn't get a chance to finish the notes of the video I was planning to do, so there's that. Yeah, I feel like working a full-time job and trying to make videos on YouTube on a regular schedule is just not conducive to a healthy lifestyle. Like, it's just one thing's always going to give. So today we're just going to have a chill discussion on jobs, work, and layoffs. Whether we like it or not, right now, the reality is we're living in an era of mass layoffs. Something that has kind of sent shockwaves through many professional industries, aka LinkedIn, is the recent layoffs in major tech companies like Alphabet's Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and countless others. This is kind of a new phenomena for many people my age, so younger millennials and kind of the Gen Z workforce. Basically anyone under the age of like 30-ish is probably quite new to this. People who've been working longer than us have definitely felt the never-ending cycle of layoffs and recessions and all those sorts of things. So it's not a new concept in and of itself, but it's certainly new to a new generation of the workforce. We have been relatively lucky in that the last 10 years has been a really great period of, massive growth and globalization, lots of expansions, new startups and new companies. And honestly, even through the global Pandora we've just been through, we saw tech companies in particular continue to grow and offer great benefits. But we're now entering a potentially global recession, I think. I don't know, I'm not an economist. And we're starting to see an increase in people, particularly young people, experience their first period of mass layoffs. And it's a pretty scary thing, I get it. And I know a lot of people are feeling quite worried about the impact that these, layoffs and recessions might have to their region or their country or even just their particular place of work. And, it's a pretty scary thing, particularly when you're, kind of just starting out in the workforce as well, because you've probably spent the last 10 years of your life studying and graduating and trying to get a job and then getting that job and working really hard to impress the people you work with. And I think because I was that type of person who just stayed on the path, the path, you've heard of the path, finish high school, go to university, get a great job, the path. Because of that, I think losing my job has always been such a terrifying thought to me. I was always worried about having to start again. I was really worried about losing all the progress that I've made. I've always worried about not having enough to kind of support my lifestyle. But I've got to be honest, I'm at a point now in my life where I get it. I get it. I get that there's just this unavoidable inherent risk to working in a lot of major industries that just have to do with potentially losing your job. And it's never really a reflection of you as a person or your ability to work or your skill set or your knowledge or anything like that. It's really just the fact that companies need to cut costs and, you had the unfortunate hand of having a red pen through your name. It's actually interesting. I think it was Google who were doing their layoffs recently, and it was in a way where no one actually knew who was getting fired until the day of. And they hired all these external consultants and algorithms and things to figure out who to fire to save as much money as they could. And they made it very clear that it wasn't about your skill set or your experience or your, the value that you bring to the workplace. It was literally just about cutting the costs. It was a range of people from senior VPs to new graduates who were all fired. There was no kind of discrimination between who was getting fired. It was just a lot of people were getting fired. So yeah, I used to be really worried of having to go through something like that, but now I'm at a point where I'm it's probably going to happen sometime in my career. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this year. But sometime in the next 40 years of my life, I'm sure that I will have to be in a position where I may lose my job due to mass layoffs. And I think I've gotten to this point now because, in my last 5 or so years working in a job like this, I've had a lot of mentors who have told me time and time again, you need to be prepared in the event that you get laid off. You need to be prepared for that reality. Don't take it personally. Don't get upset. Don't take it to heart. Just get up and figure out what you're going to do next if that ever happens to you. And I think it's because of that kind of thinking and that kind of mentorship, I guess, I've come to learn that no matter how much I love my job, no matter how much I love the people I work with, no matter how much fun I'm having or anything like that, my job will never now be my life. And it sounds like a weird thing to say, but it's quite a cathartic thing to be able to come to the realization that you do have a world outside of your job, and you do have a world outside of your education or what your task is that day. And I don't say this in a way to be like,
oh, I hate companies, they're all evil, they're always firing people, blah, blah, blah.
No, I'm just a really realistic person in that there is literally zero power in exerting your energy into feelings of despair because of, some company deciding to fire someone. And it's funny, I talk about layoffs as though I've experienced it, and I actually haven't, but it's more that I'm preparing myself for the inevitable fact that one day it could happen, And, getting laid off, of course it sucks. Of course it's going to hurt, but it's likely not an indication of who you are as a person, how you work, your work ethic, or your skill set. It's got nothing to do with that. Unless you were fired for just being bad at your job. That's a totally different conversation. What I'm talking about right now is the mass layoffs we're seeing at major tech companies. And I think that's what it comes down to. These tech companies really find the perfect people to work for them. You've got really high achievers, people who did really well in school, people who are getting great grades through university and college, people who have really perfect resumes that are able to kind of jumpstart their careers really early into these big tech companies. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that these people, myself included, I'm not exempt from this, but these people have nothing really going on outside of their work life. For a very long time, my whole work life was basically my entire life. Especially when I first started at this job, and especially when I first got my first promotion, because then I was like, oh my God, they promoted me. I have to do a really good job so they know that I'm an amazing worker. And, I guess that's what is so hard about it for people. You've spent your whole life getting to this certain point, getting to the career that you want, and then being let go for no fault of your own. It's just the fact that we're in a recession and that we need to cut costs and we need to reduce our books and all that sort of stuff. So I guess what I'm trying to say in this video is it's important to try and find your own path, because the path that was laid out to you by society is not conducive to a healthy lifestyle. I think as people, we're somewhat conditioned to follow a certain mold or a certain path very early on. That training starts from a young age to do certain things in life. Go to school, graduate, go to university, graduate, maybe get another degree, graduate, get a full-time job that you've worked all this way to get to, and then do that job for 40 plus years until you can retire and finally have some peace in your life. And I think because I was so focused on, the path, I became so obsessed with my job and being so obsessed with being good at my job, so obsessed with being liked, so obsessed with the life that I had because of my job. And because of all of that, I kind of forgot to just stop and be like, hey, there's a whole world outside of your job, right? I know I'm saying things that just seem so obvious, but when you're kind of stuck in that routine and stuck on that path, you do kind of forget to look outside and reflect and think about what it is you actually want to do. And honestly, I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I started YouTube, because it gave me an excuse to really think about the world beyond my actual world. So, it's important to really take the time to reflect and think about your career and your ambitions, because otherwise you don't really change and you don't really grow and you don't really consider what options are available to you. Because, in a week's time or a year's time or 5 years' time, you might be in a position where the company that you work for is going through these big changes and start doing mass layoffs, and suddenly you're in a position where you don't have a job and you have to start to look for one. And when you're kind of stuck in the mold for such a long time, it's hard to think about what other types of jobs you can do because you're so used to that one thing that you become such an expert at. It was kind of like when I transitioned from being an arts and a history and a literature student in university to then going into studying law and trying to understand this completely different way of academic writing and persuasive writing and critical thinking. It's two very different types of being a student, and I think experiencing both of them back to back is kind of like a culture shock. And I kind of think of jobs as the same, when you work in a job or a company for a really long time, you become so ingrained in that culture, but then having to jump into a new world by no fault of your own suddenly becomes this really scary experience. And I say all this as someone who genuinely loves their job and genuinely loves the people that I work with and the type of work that I do and the experience that I get. But despite that, there is this unavoidable curse of working in certain industries where you just need to be prepared for the worst, and you just need to be prepared for in the event that global markets tank, companies lose a ton of money and suddenly are forced to start laying people off. And again, it has nothing to do with your skill set or your passion for your work or anything like that. it has to do with outside factors that you can't control. So I think it is important to really think about work beyond your work and think about work beyond what you're doing now. You know, one of the biggest worries I have in life is staying on the path for too long. And only because it's like the easy thing to do, you know, it's the path that's set for a lot of people. You know, I'm very grateful for all that I have. You know, I've got my degree, I've got my master's, I've got a good job, I got a nice place to live. I feel very comfortable in the life that I have. And I know that's quite lucky because it's quite a rare thing to experience. And honestly, I even have some guilt over it because I come from like a poor immigrant family, and feeling comfortable was never something that we experienced as a family. There was never any backup. There was never any generational wealth. There was never any safety net. It was all about the now and the present and being able to make something for yourself. So we live very frugal. We live small and we didn't do a lot. So I guess now that I'm growing up and setting up a comfortable life for myself, it's all a very foreign experience to me. And I think because of all of that and my kind of overachieving student mindset, particularly during the global panini years, it meant I just became a little bit complacent with where I am in life because I was just so grateful to be alive and be employed and be okay. And often that meant giving up my life for work. You know, we often go so hard for our work and we often spend more hours than we should at work. And ultimately, like, that's the thing, right? No matter how much you love your job and no matter how great they treat you, there is always going to be this inherent risk of being laid off due to something that's completely out of your control. So I guess my advice would be, no matter how much you love your job, you always need to make sure you're taking time for yourself and taking time for what else interests you. You know, be cautious of when you clock in and when you clock off. If you don't, you're going to hit that burnout stats real quick. And don't spend too much of your time just focusing only on work because it's only one part of your life. You know, at the end of the day, you only have your job for one period of your life, but you have you for your whole life. So, you know, even though this kind of like trend of mass layoffs we're seeing in major American tech companies or even global tech companies hasn't really hit my world just yet in terms of like my job and like the industry that I work in. But I can imagine that sometime within my life, at some point, whether it's a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I will likely have to be laid off due to things that have nothing to do with me. Like, I'd be really embarrassed to get fired if I was bad at my job. Like, I don't think that'll ever happen because I'm pretty good at my job. But if I got fired, like, that's a different story. But to get laid off from a job where, you know, you're part of a group of like thousands or hundreds of people who just got fired, it's less of a personal attack. So when you spend your time thinking about what your life is going to look like and what your job's going to look like and what your career is going to look like, it's kind of important to remember that, you know, your career is only one part of you at any given time, right? Even when you're working full time and you're in it and you're in the grind and you're doing the 9 to 5, there's always going to be something outside that job that should be keeping you going, because otherwise those layoffs are going to hit a lot harder than they should. And, you know, ultimately, this is the thing about jobs. I don't have a dream job. I don't dream of labor. I don't think about what I want to do. And that's because I only dream of pizza. And sometimes the Real Housewives. And sometimes Taylor Swift. Every time I have a dream about meeting Taylor Swift, I wake up and I think, what's the point? Listen, I'm sorry for the nonsensical rant today. I've just been kind of thinking about this like era of layoffs and jobs and resignations and burnout and productivity and hustle culture and quiet quitting and the great resignation and this and that and all these kind of buzz terms that have been going around the corporate industrial world. And it's kind of made me think more about what my path is and what my life outside of work looks like and what my life outside of work will look like down the track. You know, one of the things that you often see in like job interviews and stuff is, you know, the interviewer asking, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I would imagine 99, if not 100% of people always answer with, in 5 years, my career will be here or there, or I want to do that. It's always so focused on your job and your career and your ambition. But I've started to think about it more as, you know, in 5 years' time, where do I want to be personally? Like, who do I want to be? Where do I want to be living? What do I want to be doing on my day-to-day? I'll always be working. Like, that's the reality of the world we live in, right? Like, I'll be working until I'm 60-something years old or whatever the retirement age is now. I do kind of worry that by the time I turn 65, they'll raise it to like 80 or something, but I do hope you enjoyed hearing me rant, and I hope you maybe considered something a little bit different when it comes to your relationship with work. I mean, of course, I do hope to see more of these kind of trends that we're seeing in social media around burnout and hustle culture and, you know, figuring out yourself a little bit more beyond work continue. It's hard to talk about these sorts of things online because they happen online, but they don't necessarily filter into the real world. But you'll constantly see think pieces about the Great Resignation or mass layoffs or firings or market downturns, whatever, kind of dominate industry news and kind of incite fear into people. And honestly, it's really just about finding your own path, you know, being able to be confident in going out into the world beyond the job that you know well and saying, here's what I am, here's what I can do. Anyway, thank you for watching the video all the way through. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a like. It really helps my channel out. If you want to see more from me, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click the bell notifications, because what have you got to lose? Nothing. If you want to leave a comment, make sure you also let me know where you're watching from in the world. Like, I like to see where everyone is and what you're up to. And I think that's everything I wanted to say today. So until next time, besties, bye.
Missing someone.